I know that you must be on your way. On your way. On your way. On your way.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by the growing phenomenon known as Posh Redneck. How are you doing? I'm so glad you could take a step away from all your debates lately and come to this little lowly channel. Appreciate you, brother. How you doing today?
I'm doing rather well. I told you I was busy today, but it's good to relax with some intellectual work as opposed to physical labor.
That's true.
So I'm happy to get into linguistic stuff. It's always great.
It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited. Again, what we're going to dive into, who knows where we're going to go, but I promise it'll be insightful. We'll start by saying Happy Halloween. That old demonic holiday, or really it's a sort of mocking of All Saints Eve, All Souls Eve. But I wanted to begin with, again, what the point of why I reached out to you to do a stream is on the topic of how symbols, language, generally speaking, matches onto reality. And so before we dive into it, just to lay out the groundwork for people, there's a scholar named Alfred Korzybski, and he was the father of what's called general semantics. And he has this phrase that has become very, very popular in the field of language, linguistics, and that is the map is not the territory, the word is not the thing. Obviously insinuating that the symbols that we use are not the things that are being symbolized. And so this has led general semantics to the point of saying that we really cannot make truth claims about reality because we're stuck in a web of linguistic association that itself is not actually mapping up to reality. And so this is the premise of where we're going to be asking, the map is not the territory, or is it? And so, Posh, I know you've had a background in linguistics. Maybe to open up this conversation then, tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what got you into linguistics and your background studying linguistics to really open up the conversation today.
Well, when I was very young, I really liked languages immediately. Being a Serb, meant that a lot of cartoons I got weren't in Serbian. They were in initially German and French, and then English became much more prevalent. Then you get into video games and everything is in this foreign language, and you want to understand it, you want to interact with it. And from there on, it just sort of expanded naturally. There was no goal to go after. There wasn't even a profession I wanted out of it. And I really liked it. I liked when I was in primary school, I loved going to competitions for it.
What kind of competitions?
Like in language.
Like, I know, just to describe, like, what is the competition like?
Well, it was, first of all, it was mostly just going out and taking basically advanced tests.
Oh, okay.
And they get graded. They can't really allow for any, auditory or any type of conversation or anything that would be allowed to be, how shall I say, any type of bias to seep in. So it had to be all just written text.
I see.
So I love doing those. For both English and French, which were the languages I got in primary school. And when it came to high school, choosing a high school, I was wondering what to go for. In my city, the only things that interested me were either the sociolinguistic grammar school or going to medicine. So I picked the first one, and the second choice was the latter. So I got into the grammar school, and from there on, it was mostly focusing on social sciences and linguistic. There wasn't a purely linguistic grammar school. After that, I wanted to go to theology. I wanted to go into a lot of things. I ended up studying French for a while, and I gave it up because it turned out that I really needed to find something useful to do. I could. The only thing I could do, because there isn't really a lot of place for translators here,
right?
And I wouldn't go to France because it's full of French people. So I focused then later on finding more of a trade in like IT and stuff. But that is basically what I started off doing, and I really took all the classes I could on linguistics and a lot of private, of course, reading. I'm the type of person who finds that fun.
Mm-hmm.
Learning like German until 5 a.m. or something.
So how many languages do you speak now?
Depending on how you ask.
Or how many can you understand, read, or speak?
About
I know you have a grasp
7.
on Latin and Greek, right?
Yes, I had Latin both in when I was studying French and in high school. For 2 years in high school, and for 1 year, but it was much more intense. Of course, when you study French, you have to go as it is a language that massively affected Latin affected French.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very intensive learning there. Greek I studied because I wanted to go into theology. It's something I might do in the future, but more for personal reasons than for seeking clergy or something. Unless my priest asks me to be a clergyman, then I have to say yes.
If God's providence takes you that direction, but same. I love theology, not to be a clergyman. I'm a layman that I like philosophy and theology. Those are very passionate topics for me.
Right, and I could be a deacon maybe, but a priest, with all the things they have to deal with, I'm the worst person to come to for advice on spiritual matters. So I know I couldn't be a good priest. I could maybe be a deacon, but as things stand, reader is good enough for me.
Yeah, a choir is good enough for me.
Oh, I didn't know you sung.
Well, I don't. We just have a very small church, so my voice then pipes up as a prominent tone amongst the choir.
Nice. We've got a pretty good choir, and the choir leader always tries to snipe me for the choir, but I have to be down there in the altar and reading the epistles and all of that fun stuff.
Hey, somebody's got to do it. That's great. So, give me a time. How old are you?
28.
28. And you have been studying languages quite for a while. What got you into not just, some people like to learn languages just to speak them or travel, go take their Instagram photos. You're interested in etymology. You're interested in the origin of the meaning of words, the evolution of words' meanings, the context within cultures and theologies, philosophies, how that influences language. So what got you into not just learning language, but when did you start to move into the sort of philosophy of language and etymology in a sort of deeper grasp?
Well, when you learn a language like I started, of course, with English, you figure out that the language I speak and this language that I'm trying to speak function completely differently.
Right.
And I cannot emphasize the differences. No articles in Serbian, 7 grammatical cases.
Oh, wow. No
just imagine like how different it is to have 3 genders in the plural as well as the singular. We have a he's, she's, and itses. So luckily, I suppose, as Serbian is more complex than English. English is a complex language in and of itself, but I mean the sheer work that goes into it. It was a bit easier, but it still forces you into this mode of thinking. And then when I got into French, I realized, okay, this is also very different. And it brought about this curiosity about, okay, how do you get from one to the other? Like, obviously, people don't just come up one day and say, I'll add a grammatical case or I'll remove one.
Right.
None of them at all, etc. So I went studying that, and I don't know, it's a passion personally. I can't pinpoint any particular moment. Right. I just got, as it developed organically, I just pressed harder on certain things, didn't really care about others, etc.
Right. So let's get into then the topic. That's a great opener in regards to how your background ties into today's general theme topic. Because I know for a lot of people, they don't really know what the hell we're talking about. Symbolic maps. What is that? What is a symbolic map of reality? And so maybe let's dive into that now, is regarding the philosophy of language, regarding general semantics and the state of the academy. How is language understood? What semiotic theory, the symbols aren't the things that they represent. And this is now the general case of language. And to a degree, it is absolutely a fact, right? No matter how thirsty you are, how many times you say water or I say water, not going to quench your thirst. So maybe you can dive in or open us up into, how do semiotics, symbols, language relate to the things symbolized and change over time and all this different stuff?
Right. So unlike mathematics, linguistics are open categories, so they can change for almost no reason at all, and that's how it seems. Sometimes you get changes just because you get, let's say, a royal from one part of the country, and then that royal starts speaking in a certain way and people start emulating it, and then you somehow get this mixture of what was already there and this new thing, and that can happen over time. Languages get standardized as people from different in the United States you don't get this nearly as much as it exists in how shall we put it, like historical nations. America is more of a design nation, very recent one, and then it didn't develop too much before you get mass communication. So even though you have very pronounced parts of the country with very strong accents, nowhere near enough, even when you compare it to England, for example. When you consider how certain parts of northern England talk compared to the southern parts. Right. And England is not a large country. By American standards, it's tiny. Right. But you see, these things developed organically. Right. So there's that influence that happens. Sometimes it is conquest. Sometimes it is just trade. You don't really need a lot. Sometimes it is religious influence. Right. Greek had a lot of influence in Serbia because of, we took, obviously, our Christianity from them. So a lot of names, Serbian names are just Greek names. My name is Sava, okay. Which would, in the West, is Sabas or Sabas, sorry. Maybe that's a good example to give. Okay, so Saba is, if I remember correctly, an Aramaic name, but then it gets to Greek. So Greeks really like putting sigmas at the end of masculine words, very big on it. So they had Sabas. But then the Latins take it and they go to Sabas. But in Greek itself, what is beta or beta became a vita. So now it's a V. So you have now Savas, and that gets into Serbian. Actually, it wasn't Serbian back then, but and we lob off the S at the end, the sigma at the end, and you get my name. But you see how these things just travel, and as you try to import a word from another language, and that word in that original language has certain phonemes being sounds, right. Graphemes being lettering, written symbol that you don't have in your language. So you try to adapt it. To try and give you an example, the name Theodore, Theodoros in Greek, meaning God's gift. You have it adapted to Serbian as Theodor. So we took the theta, that th sound that doesn't exist in Slavic languages, and we turned it into a T. But the Russians weren't happy with the T, and they turned it into an F. So the name Theodore is in Russian Fyodor.
Oh, okay.
So Fyodor, Dostoevsky, his name is Theodore.
Right. Okay.
So,
Wow, I
so,
didn't
so you
realize
see,
that.
that is right.
Yeah, I didn't
So
realize that. That's great.
I'll give some practical examples
Okay.
later on with Western languages. I don't want to talk about Slavic languages; they're complex enough as it is.
Well, let
So
me
that
say something with the example of your name. I was gonna wait. We're gonna before I was like, oh, we'll compartmentalize the stream. Forget it. But your the name is a perfect example of how I want to challenge some of the general presuppositions of the philosophy of language, general semantics. So as you pointed out, words, a name, evolves, changes even within Serbia, northern, southern, different emphasis on syllables, on consonants, how they're pronounced, and therefore it gives this sort of cultural convention to language. Yet at the same time, as Christians, the map, the language, the linguistic aspect of ourselves is of a higher order. It is how we're made in the image of God. And of course, we believe that God spoke the world into existence. And one of the reasons why we always say memory eternal is just for this point, right? That the name of the person is somehow ontologically connected with the person. And if God remembers your name, then you're going to be remembered in eternity. And so I just point that out because as we move through this conversation, I want the listeners to keep in mind the presupposition of the academy and what you were just highlighting is the sort of cultural convention of language and how it involves and how it moves. However, as we move through this conversation, we're also going to challenge the notion that language is purely a cultural convention and that it is just a sort of symbolic representation of reality. Reality is ultimately real. But as general semantics makes that sort of Kantian distinction between reality and then what we can know, we're kind of stuck then within this web association of symbols, and we can really never know reality itself. Whereas magicians or Christians believe the word comes primary to creation. And so the question then, which one is more real? Is it the language? Is it the world, the symbolic world that we do reside in, the symbolic world? Why did God give Adam the ability to name the animals? And so maybe dive into your own interpretation of the sort of theological importance of naming names. They are cultural conventions. They do evolve. They do change. But at the same time, there's something that is very primary about them that is unchanging.
indeed, indeed. Even with personal names, things get people get very obsessive about it, believing, if you say Yeshua instead of Jesus, it's holier, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, that's
it's
definitely the Hebrew roots all feel that way for sure.
right, and that is something that we really should get away from. But it is part of this idea that the word somehow equals the thing.
Right.
And no, it doesn't. We know that, but let's first address what you were talking about. Naming the animals, of course, because he has dominion over them. This is also part of the thing. You name people, even people. When Prophet Daniel goes to Babylon as part of this to become part of the court of Nebuchadnezzar. He gets renamed. He and the other ones brought along get renamed, and what was it? Something like Balta, something which starts with Baal. I can't remember it exactly, because he is named by his new king.
Right.
He now serves a purpose in this court because he was, literate and all of that. And you start a court, you start bringing people from all around your newly conquered empire. They're sort of ambassadors. You can understand people's particular customs in those areas because you don't want them to rebel, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
But that is also part of it, this dominion. I don't want to get too Petersonian and, you can then grasp it. And
Right.
in a way, yes, but in another way, this ability to speak is completely unique to humans.
Right.
When they try and teach animals to speak, and I don't just mean produce sounds like you can do with parrots and certain corvid species.
Difference between communication and language; those are different categories.
Yes, because they can learn how shall I say, a word, because they know this sound or sequence of sounds
Right.
has a certain effect. But I can't then go and start explaining the etymology to a parrot.
Right.
It cannot be bothered, right? It is something so unique to humans, to the point that when they try and teach chimpanzees and gorillas to use sign language,
Yeah.
this is a separate thing. You know, the people who studied them, first of all, are lunatics. Second of all, what was that hippie woman with the gorilla, Coco,
Oh,
or
Jane
something?
Goodall?
Sorry, I went to Serbian just out of anger. But right, her. She, you know, they don't let people come and see the findings, because these gorillas, this gorilla, you know, she showed certain signs and
Yeah, Coco, I remember that.
right, but what was it? Someone else who studied chimpanzees wanted to see the data, and she wouldn't allow it. And she also says, "Oh no, I as her handler can only understand the personal expression of this gorilla."
Of course.
So she, and in doing so, she completely defeated the point of the experiment.
Right.
Right. So, and it showed that these primates, they wouldn't start talking on their own the way children talk on their own. You know, leave a young child in a room to play, and they will just speak out of nowhere. Sounds like something would happen on Halloween, but you know.
So it's fair to say then, again, we're going to tease this out more, but the animals cannot participate in the map, right? We're not even getting into the map and its relationship to the territory itself, but the map is a sort of a faculty of understanding within the symbolic association that animals, they can be trained through Pavlovian, you know, sympathetic processes that, okay, you know, this hand signal means this and this, but when it comes then to maneuvering themselves, their thought, their expression through the map of language itself, they can't participate in that. And so...
No, it is completely rigid with animals, right? The fonts that we can read languages in is a great example of that. You know, and I don't mean just simple one, but going to like a more Gothic font, or that fake Greek font, you know, to write things in English, but about, or on like souvenirs, they would write something, you know, in English, but with a fake Greek font. And it almost is this meshing of the Greek alphabet and the English alphabet. Mm-hmm. And we still understand it, which is again something completely alien in the animal world, to be able to do this. Right. We have so much latitude, and this is again unique to us. And animals, as you said, it's more Pavlovian than it is any type of higher reasoning.
Right. And that's where people want to say, well, dolphins have language. No, they communicate. Communication is not the same thing as language. Language is this higher order faculty that is, it is an analogy of many different ways, you know, the puns, linguistic. This is why we find that humorous. We love language. We live in language. And this is where I want to be bringing up, and as we move through this conversation, is which one is ultimately more real? Do we live in the territory, or do we actually live more likely inside the map of itself of language? And then the languages that we do create are in fact not the territory. It's an attempt to describe the territory, but at the same time, language itself as a energy, a process that comes from God, is more real than reality. And so how do we come to understand the fact that language as an a priori phenomenon is more real than reality, but then we do culturally create maps of reality, and then we're all living really within those maps because the maps affect how we then view the territory?
Right. This is a very difficult question. Modern linguistic academia is so devoted to postmodern ideas and post-structuralism, and, you know, writing books about how words have no meanings, etc. It is all. it is this basic idea that you can have it through behaviorism. You learn language, which was behind the idea that you can teach primates to speak.
Right.
Turns out, no, there's something very unique about that. Chomsky was very adamant about that. But the thing is, and I don't know if we should get into the noose immediately.
You go wherever. I'm open for anything. I tried to be more. I can't. It's like I just throw the whole kitchen sink at people. So we were going to be more methodical in the way we approach this topic. But, just dive into it.
But that would take literally dozens of hours.
Yeah.
To really try. So we better hit the important points.
Right.
Because a lot of the other thing is just static noise, to be honest.
Yeah.
So how we would see it, because we are noetic beings, right? And maybe we could say that animals are then lower noetic beings. You get into all the way to plants who would even be far more lower noetic beings, but that's not talking necessarily about the nous that we have. It's almost a distinction in kind. But as noetic beings, we function on a particular level. And we function on a level that sort of integrates our body as it is. It integrates our perceptions, therefore, the empirical data that we just absorb, but we also process it. But the fact that we have minds as such makes impossible to interact with the world without a type of language.
Right.
So when we say God spoke things into the world, there isn't a particular language that God spoke.
Right.
There are all sorts of ideas.
It's Hebrew.
There are people who literally believe that, and that wouldn't even work for the Pentateuch. So let alone God. But we sort of try to minimize it as if language was just these manifestations of either symbols or sounds.
Right. Yeah, it's this extreme.
Right.
And the vast majority of people are to the extreme that it's all cultural convention. There is nothing that's truly real about language.
Indeed. But we should remind ourselves that our language, our pale, not imitations, but pale, maybe individual instantiations of what God does.
Right.
So we, as being made in the image of God, we can also do this on a much lower level. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we have language and therefore God has immense language. No, we have this tiny little ability because God has this infinite ability. So let's not reverse that, and let's not reduce God's language to what language is to us. Right. It is this horrible thing people do.
And one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for the stream is again, as you said, our languages that we've constructed, no matter what language it be, is a sort of very pale comparison to this sort of linguistic phenomenon that we're describing of divinity itself. And at the same time, our cities, the things that we sort of being made in the image of God, the things that we build, construct like he did the world, is essential to us using language and communicating. And then that's how we form communities. That's how, and so then language is how we have communion with each other. Now, again, we have communion with God through the Eucharist, but you see this sort of recapitulating motif here. And so, if a group of people had no language, no symbolic system, would they even be able to use water? Would they know what water is? Like, when we get to interact with the territory itself, we can't really know what it is without language. We can't fully participate in even the very primitive state of nature without language.
Exactly, and it might not be advanced language.
Right,
but
it may not be.
Whenever we would perceive of something, like a thing, and maybe it's not a concrete thing, maybe it is a more abstract thing, like war, in a sense, isn't a concrete thing. It is this sort of description of a certain state of affairs. But you would be able to perceive it. Now, how you would describe it is going to vary among people groups, both within like a smaller set of language. You're going to have different words for different things, but you are going to experience it as a language. Even if you're mute, you're going to experience it as a language.
Right.
Deaf, blind, all of this, there is a universality to language.
Right.
Because from our perspective, because God created it that way, right?
Even Helen
His
Keller,
word.
if you believe in Helen Keller, deaf and blind, look how good she was with language. She wrote books.
Of course. Let's not get down that rabbit
Yeah, I'm
hole.
teasing. No.
But essentially, language is inescapable.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, as you say, magic recognizes this, but again, that's more of a perversion of the reality that it is.
Feel free to
because
dive
of
into that, because
God.
that's where I wanted to go next, is this relationship then with magic, our Christianity, the role of language, of how we're made in the image of God, and then how we're utilizing this particular faculty, this higher order faculty known as language.
Right. So when we talk about magic, because it's an enormously broad term, they put great faith into all types of semiotics and linguistics. Phonetics, very important also in this. And we can see as Orthodox Christians how we have all of those, but these go astray.
Right.
So you can write symbols to somehow manipulate reality, to somehow map this reality, because there is this structure of reality underlying what we perceive, and there is a way to concretize it into, let's say, a symbol.
Yes.
There are those who believe a certain set of words,
Yes.
certain frequencies that you can hit.
Yes.
All of this is tapping basically into this basically linguistic nature of reality that they perceive. Now, of course, we say this is demonic,
Right.
because it is a perversion of how it actually works in the Orthodox Church. But that is as broad as I can make it. So I don't know if you want to go into
to
particulars
dive
or
deeper
something.
into it, I mean, as we've talked about, the process of magic is sort of the substantiation or the manifestation of one's will. And so how do they go about doing that? Well, once you understand magic, whether it be sex magic, chaos magic, sigil magic, it is all a semiotic process. And so it's all, the entire form, a ritual is still a semiotic process. There's going to be words that are going to be enunciated at certain points to symbolize certain things. And even if you're getting into conjuration magic, to have access and dominion over various demons, you have to know their name. Again, emblematic of, again, our theology of even God knowing our name and this dominion. You pointed to Daniel. He has a new name when he goes to the different empire, and then the king gives him a name to symbolize the dominion over this thing. That's what names are about. When you come into the Christian church, you get a Christian name. And so magic is all about using semiotic processes, the map, to change the territory. And so within the majority of people who believe language is a cultural convention, that, oh, well, if you're in China, you speak Mandarin. If you're, if you're here, if you're in Southern India, you speak Tamil. If you're over here, you speak Arabic. And it's like, well, that's true. That is true. And they are cultural conventions. But as you're pointing out, there's a meeting point. Language is really this very ambiguous middle ground between divinity and pure cultural convention, pure relativist associations. It's somewhere right in the middle. And so magic has totally picked up on this, and both Orthodox Christianity generally speaking, but then all practitioners of magic approach this from the opposite direction. Whereas in the majority of philosophy of language, philosophy of linguistics, general semantics, says that the map is not the territory. Language itself is totally divorced from reality, where the people who are actually practicing magic view it in the exact opposite way, that the way that we change the territory, like God created the territory with language, is that we manipulate these culturally constructed language systems so that it alters the perception of the people using the map. And maybe we can get into this, is that the map is more fundamental than we realize. When I talked about a sort of swimming or that the animals can't get into, they have no access to the map. It's that, the map, you think with your map, the languages that you have limits the association of understanding possible within your own mind. And so language is incredibly influential on how somebody then looks out onto the world and what it is that they're actually seeing. And so there's been really interesting experiments. I talked about this, I think, before in other streams, of how people who don't have, there was like a tribe who didn't have a name for the color blue, and they actually didn't see the color blue. They couldn't see it. And so without words give like a cognitive appreciation for a thing's existence in itself. And so then magic, what it's trying to do is not only manipulate the map for its own instrumental means, but what we're seeing on society now, and has always been the case, is the manipulation of language, the English language, gender plurality, changes. Then when you think of Gen Z, it's not just that they're being propagandized to believe these things. The map of reality itself has been altered so that they can't help to use English language as to see the plurality of gender, because you're looking through it like glasses putting on your face through your noetic lens, right? So your nous is looking through the sort of lens of the language map that you have. And so that then is really interesting to think about, that the high magicians of this world, what they're interested in is altering and manipulating the map of reality. So that not that you're participating in magic, but that your own cognitive faculties are going to perceive the things that they want you to see.
Right. This, you mentioned the tribes. We also know this from ancient literature. They describe, Homer, I believe, describes sea as basically being burgundy. The Egyptians called the Mediterranean called it the great green of the north, and things like that. The basics that underlie Korzybski is that he is basically a materialist.
Right.
He believes that we are these neutral, right, observers of reality, and we take input, and we cannot really know when we have taken sufficient input to be able to say that we have taken sufficient input. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When we have described a phenomenon sufficiently to know that we have done so.
Right.
And that is why he goes for the map is not the territory. And he would be correct about that, because we can observe something that happens, but not know exactly why it happens. It's sort of like, imagine a very primitive tribe, and they get a sense of their local, microclimate. So how the weather changes in the seasons of the year, how when you see clouds in that part of your living space, that tends to show that it's going to rain. Or there's going to be a hailstorm. I know this from the old people in my father's home village. They say, oh, when you see over that mountain white clouds, there's going to be a storm, and there is. But they know that from their own microclimate. Right. But being a primitive tribe, they wouldn't have nothing near our ability to predict weather today, because we have instruments, we have this
and
worldwide
those, again, are symbol systems, right? Our
right,
instruments
exactly.
are an extensions of our semiotic use itself.
Yes, and reducing them to a certain spectrum that we can interpret, that we can understand, that speaks to us. And when you have this global overview, now you know that these patterns over here affect the microclimate there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the problem is he sees us as always being this primitive tribe, right? But I mentioned, if you have that worldview, if you have the worldview that it's a one-way thing, that it's just the observer trying to absorb information from the outside world, you can see how he comes to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, the map affects us.
Right.
It is not one way.
Right.
And these people, as you say, these high magicians, as they try to affect the way we speak, what we're allowed to say, what we teach children at school, for example, is going to affect the spectrum, the visible spectrum to them.
Yes.
And I mean visible, in a broad sense.
Absolutely. And this is where you see this real spiritual battle then play out between good and evil within language itself. Because not that our God is not limited to language. Obviously, the system of this world is going to be limited to the processes of this world. But you can see the manipulation of the map of reality, which is happening right now. And of course, English should be the focal point. This is the lingua franca of the world. This is going to be the New World Order language. It is. And so, good or bad, you need to know English, because that's where the frontier of this sort of battle, the battlefront, is really in the English language. Now, it's happening, it's spilling over in all the different languages, but all languages are rooted within very traditional systems. Where English is a phenomenon itself is of amalgamation. It is this thing. It's like Hinduism. You can't. The Buddha couldn't divorce himself from Hinduism because Hindus just said, "Oh yeah, the Buddha's he's an avatar of Vishnu." So then they just take Buddhism and they just blurs back into this blob known as Hinduism. And so it's like that's what they're doing with English. It's like this amorphous blob that it can just suck up everything, and so then we create more words. But then the redefining of the map itself is getting these kids, they're not going to be able to see the God-created reality, that is the territory that God created underneath the language. Right? The language that we try to construct to describe the reality that God created, they are altering the language to only see the reality that they themselves are creating, that is then against the order of God himself. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And you said it well, that there are languages which have no gender at all. Mandarin is one of them.
Right.
They have words for man and woman, but they are not gendered words.
Right.
You say da for both man and woman, as you can't really translate it as a he or she or an it.
Yeah.
Because it encompasses
Ren is
all.
Person. There is no differentiation between male and female.
Right. And not only that, you would add ren for plural, right?
Right.
Which is
so Ren, American. Zhongguo
Yes.
Ren, so Zhong, China, Guo, country, Ren, person, Chinese person.
Right, and the Japanese have this with Jin, right? Nippon Jin, etc. But also things with means person. But I want to say the plural, like you say, Peng Yua is like friend, and then Peng Yuaran is like friends. Even though you don't have to do it, with it sort of showing how, if you want to emphasize the fact that it's a plural. Mm-hmm. It's a very weird thing for us in the West, but it developed from this particular condition that existed in what we know as China, where you have a writing system that makes no sense to us. But if you have a universal writing system with their logographs, they can read it differently, but understand the same thing. Mm-hmm. So they've decided to put things fully on the symbol and not the phonetics, whereas in the West here we have put almost everything on phonetics, right? We write out the words as we are supposed to say them, but that also means that if I say dog to a person in Germany and they don't speak English, they won't get dog. They would understand Hund.
And that's why the characters are what unified. For those who don't know, China, and this is still today, if you go to China, there's over 200 different dialects of Chinese oral language. But what unifies all these is the Hanzi, the Chinese character. So because they have the character, it doesn't matter if you're in Sichuan or you're in Beijing. Well, it's the same language. Yeah, my pronunciations are different, and at points they're so different that they cannot even understand each other. Chinese people sometimes can't understand each other. They have to write it down because that's what unifies them. Where in the West, as you're making a point, it's sort of the orality of language is the sort of a collective agreement on how we kind of come together. It's a very different approach to the use of language.
Right, we have a lingua franca, which basically means the language of the Franks, right? Because French was for the longest time the language of the courts throughout Europe. But as you said, in China, they had the writing system to unify them, even with the Japanese. Modern Japanese doesn't work that way, but they have the kanji, which is an adaptation of what was it, Hanzi?
Yeah, Hanzi.
Right, and they basically just write out the Chinese characters. They read them as Japanese. But there was a story, I think, about some European trader who knew about Chinese but didn't speak Japanese, and he talked to this noble, Japanese noble who did speak Chinese, and they would write things down. So completely different cultures, not even geographically close, but they have this way to communicate.
Right.
And all of this to say that it affects the way these people think about things. It affects the way people interact with each other. And that effect, in essence, is the map is going to get standardized in a certain way. So for us, it is phonetics. For them, it is semiotics almost completely.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that China, because they don't have gender, that they have fallen to the modern gender ideology. Why? Because they are still based in something that this language is an attempt to communicate.
Right.
But it's just because you don't have this category that we do, it doesn't make them any more susceptible to the manipulation. I don't know if I want to make a further point, but I tend to go on tangents.
No,
so sorry.
I mean, no, you're making a really good point, and so. Again, the way we use language, one of the things I love to point out is the difference between our appreciation of the collectivity and the individualism. And that I'm not sure, this would maybe something to really think about, the effect Christianity has had and Christ being a person in regards to our understanding of the individual or the primacy of the individual to some degree. Because when you write the address in Asia, doesn't matter if you're Korean, Japanese, or Chinese, you begin with the country, then the province, then the city, then the street, then the house number, and then your name. Your name is the last thing that's presented in your address, where, at least in the West, I don't know what it's like in Serbia, you begin with your name, your house number, your street, your town, your area, province, state, then your country. We begin our understanding of place from the entirely different perspectives, the opposite end of the spectrums. And this is, again, tied to the map and our relationship to the territory, the linguistic maps that our minds then are embedded in. And that brings in the question, like, which one is more real? Which one is more real, the territory or the map? Not that you need to answer that. That's what I'm posing for the audience. But go ahead.
I can give a very similar couple of examples. In English, in American English, you tend to go with first name, last name, right? Earlier, and not too much earlier, in Britain, you would just say Christian name and surname. So the Christian name is the equivalent of your first name, but surname, S-U-R, it is a shorthand. It is what the French, how they contracted the Latin super, and super means above. Right. So it is this thing that is above your name.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that was the origin of. Okay, that makes sense.
Right. In French, I remember when I first learned this, you get a test and, write your name and your surname, right? But it says nom, prénom. So nom is name, prénom means basically pre-name. So you're thinking, okay, you say name, you write David. You have failed already because when they say name, they mean your family name. And prénom, this thing that goes before the name is the family name is this your personal name within this family name.
Right. You're like your personal signifier within this collective.
Right. But we get so lost because what it means to have an identity nowadays is how you differ from your community. What it used to mean is how this community and what it is and how you participate in it. You know, Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas means he was from Aquino.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the city of Aquino. It's not a last name as we would see it nowadays. And we see this with all sorts of earlier saints, right?
Right.
Until you get to, you know, Saint Nikolai Velimirovich or John Maximovich, right. You know, people you have so many Saint Johns that, you know, you sort of give up on the thing that
you start adding a surname.
Right, you don't address monastics by surnames technically, but you know, but that is a big thing because in Christianity there is no emphasis on individuality or community per se.
Right.
They don't
definitely a both and more so.
Yes, because that is what it means to be part of a church, right?
Right.
Church from Greek ecclesia, you know, ekkaleo and all of that, but it basically means the place of gathering. So this community that we form is supposed to shape us and actually shapes us, the church especially, much more than we shape it.
Right.
But we also shape it.
Right.
And we have our duty to shape it in a more godly direction.
Yes.
But that is something we have, and the language reflects that, absolutely. Because it's not that you just have language, it's only language affects behavior. Behavior will affect language.
Yes.
Cursing has become far more common, especially on television and things like that. But it comes after the culture itself degrading. So the language will reflect the degradation, but will also then increase it.
Right.
Because we are fundamentally linguistic creatures, and our behavior is also a type of language.
Yeah.
Bowing down before, I don't know if all traditions do this, but in Serbia, when you mention during the liturgy the Mother of God, we all make a bow once. And then that is also a type of prayer. That is a type of language. That is why we in Serbia, we are not going to get pews. we are very much against pews, and we see it as a hindrance to worship.
Right. Because
you are then limited to speech, to you can still make the sign of the cross, and all of that, and that is how your body can participate. But if you allow for this, if you allow for certain feast days when a type of certain parts of the gospel are read, we all just kneel down completely and bow our heads. That is all language, and that behavior shapes us.
Yep.
How we think about things shapes us. When you kiss the hand of a priest, that shapes you.
Right.
In a more godly way, in a more humble way.
Right.
If you just go with the idea that, this symbol, as you mentioned, you know, the magic also can involve like sex magic.
Right.
And if you see this as a type of sex magic to kiss the hand, you're going to interpret that in a certain way. But that is your particular understanding of language.
And that's the map you're using, right?
Exactly.
That's the
exactly.
difference between map shifting.
Yes. And how there's this interaction between, as you said, map and, you know, our personal use of terms.
Yeah. Well, in this map shifting, this is why Jim Bob, obviously myself, anybody that's interested in the transcendental argument for God, we're looking at the paradigmatic level when we engage at debates. Why? Because we're working off different maps. We're not describing the same territory, even we're both using the same word, spirit, not the same territory. And so paradigm and paradigmatic thinking is essential to then taking your mind outside the map that you're in and then realizing that there's multiple maps describing multiple territories, and the map then is to some degree influential on the territory it's describing. As you're saying, just as they affect us to some degree. And I love your point that Christianity isn't overly individualistic, as we see the European culture move towards, given the Christian foundation. And so, for so many in the ancient world, especially before Christ, only the king or prominent philosophers or eunuchs or, how do you have a unique identity in the ancient world? Very few people did. But then with Christ, in a way, we gain a sort of unique individual identity by following Christ, God becoming a new person. But then that gets ramped up to the extreme degree then with post the Enlightenment, obviously. So with humanism, individual, all this stuff, where the ancient word, Greek word for symbol, symbolo, is really what we're talking about here, and it's both and. It's two realities being brought together, right? And so the Korzybskis of the world, the general semantics, the philosophical linguists, they've moved where there is no reality being brought together. There's the Kantian distinction, and so it's just semiotic associations, where what's really happening is language is bringing two realities together, that divine reality that we've been trying to talk about, that language of God that is above language. It's no language that we can put our finger on, but it is linguistic. And then the total, the just blunt physical structures of nature, that the territory that we're trying to describe, symbols, language, words, we're bringing these things together. We're throwing two realities together. That's what the Eucharist, that's why people, Catholics I've seen, they can't understand why Orthodox say it's a bloodless, rational sacrifice, and yet we absolutely believe it to be the blood and body of Christ. That's because we're using symbol in the correct way. You see, even the Catholics with transubstantiation has a trouble with the full concept of the symbol itself. It moves from one extreme to the other extreme. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. This is a huge thing. It's as we talk about the map. First, I wanted to mention. I think Jonathan Pajot said, when people hear symbolic, like the Eucharist is symbolic, we can say it's symbolic,
right?
But for people in these, especially low church Protestantism, high church Protestantism is, all over the place, Lutherans and Calvinists and whatever, but they see symbolic as basically not real. We say symbolic because it is a certain type of real. So as you mentioned, why the etymological point of why we say symbolic. But in modern times, symbolic is like a symbolic gesture.
Right.
So basically worthless, but a small type of
It's
object,
the general
right?
semantic influence, this postmodern influence, this extreme influence on a symbol is devoid now of the reality that it actually is bringing together, right? And that's what we began with. The map is not the territory. The symbol is devoid of reality. There is no bringing together.
And I wanted to talk about spirits a bit.
Yeah.
We have all sorts of ways that they are described, but ultimately nowadays people just try to find a way to turn spirits material. They cannot deal with it. Even Thomas Aquinas, I think quintessence is his word for the fifth essence, which is what angels are made of, right? If I remember correctly, I might be wrong on that. But basically, when we see the word spirit, from Latin spiritus, it means breath or wind. And you can see why one would use like a spiritual entity. And when we say powers and principalities of the air. So people say, oh, so it's material, but it's very low density, right? And things like that. People try to bring it down to the material. But the ancients understood that these creatures weren't like a different type of matter, but they had to describe them in some way. So they saw spirit as like air or wind or breath, as something that is apt to show a certain way of understanding these beings.
Right.
When we look at like alcoholic beverages that are called spirits, they're not called spirits because there's, demons in them, but they undergo the process of distillation.
Right.
And that is boiling something, turning it into vapor, and then condensing it in a very concentrated form on the other side.
Right.
So that turning it into vapor, it turns it into this air-like thing, and that is why they're called spirits.
Right.
But if you don't have this understanding of symbology, that they're not trying to grasp something fully. Mm-hmm. They were all aware that subjective and objective isn't the way we use it today, where subjective is meaningless and objective is completely true, because for something to be objective, you have to become it and fully understand yourself, right. Which is completely unreachable. But you do the best you can. When we talk about spirits as powers and principalities of the air, we understand angels to be noetic beings, higher noetic beings, higher than us, for now. But again, people then try to say, when we have visions and all of that, which would get into territory that we can't understand, someone like the prophets who have the ability to see them and saints who have the ability to see them. It's not that like with the tribe which can't see blue. And then you show them pictures of swatches of color, and then they get trained to see this distinction, and then they see blue. Right. We can't train in that way to see angels, like looking at pictures of angels.
Right. That's a good
right.
point, yeah.
It is a very metaphysical thing, and we can't really understand it. But people just want to believe that they are material, but in a different way material, because they're so bound by the paradigm, by the language of materialism and materialistic existence, that they only conceive of things being in one way or another material.
Right. And I think that's why you were talking. One of the things that popped in my mind, again, carrying on the idea of the true symbol, bringing two realities together, that's really what language was always intended to do. And so when Adam names the animals and begins to develop what we might, as humanity develops language, it's trying to describe a reality that, for all intents and purposes, people believe God or gods created, no matter what tradition they're in. And so there is this point of that's exactly this bringing of two realities together was exactly the point of the language. But as God moves further and further out of the picture, language is not about bringing transcendent realities or a reality that is the metaphysical reality imminently through symbols that's describing the things that we're experiencing. No, it just becomes a cultural convention. It just becomes a new symbol system. And as you said, the sort of materialism that then is weighing on people is taking, as I think is doing, moving God further and further and further out. And so now, you talk about a metaphysical existence of an angel or something, and now it's like, well, can we measure the electrons? Well, let me do a recording of some sort, and everything then has to be measured and captured in some sort of materialistic way. But this is a shift in the language itself, and this is the shift in the map that, as we're trying to say, is incredibly, incredibly important, and really brings into questions which one is more important, which one's more primary to one's experience of the world itself, or the map that they're using to understand the world. And most people just do not even think about the influence of the map that they're using within their own head.
This is why Orthodoxy puts a massive emphasis on living Orthodox, not on having the understanding of the Orthodox philosophers. As grand as they are not saints because they were very smart. They're saints because they lived a holy life and imaged God in a proper way.
Right.
They were good servants of God, so they experienced theosis.
Right.
It wasn't some type of mental exercise.
Right.
That is why we believe saints could be wrong on certain points of doctrine.
That's why Protestantism is a mental exercise, and the Eucharist is a symbol in the absence of a reality.
I had this debate with many Protestants. They come and tell us, oh, you say you're going to go to some illiterate peasant in the medieval era and go to them and start explaining the essence energies distinction. I said, no, actually, if you have an Orthodox illiterate peasant, he participates in the life of the church, he does his prayers. If he has questions, he goes to the priest, etc., etc., etc. The people really burdened with learning all the high-end stuff are bishops,
right.
Not even priests necessarily.
Right.
It would be optimal, but bishops are the ones tasked with dealing with these types of matters.
Right.
So the living a godly life has nothing to do with that, but the bishop has a function as the shepherd. Right. He's a bishop, episcopos, which technically means overseer, but as the word is used more as this is a fun thing about the word. He is watching over sheep, right? The episcopos. But actually, if you have a herd, you're going to be a rich man in the old world. So you wouldn't be watching over your own sheep. You would pay someone to watch your sheep. Maybe it would be your child or something even, but you would usually have a shepherd who looks over someone else's sheep.
Mm.
That is why the word episcopos is used as bishop. It becomes bishop as it filters out through
he's looking
English.
Over God's sheep.
Exactly. He's not looking over his own sheep. He's looking over God's sheep. That is a fun thing embedded in the language. But as you said, Protestants, they have to get into all sorts of very, very high-end philosophical discussions. When people say the fundamentalist movement, we can all agree on the fundamentals. Okay, which are the fundamentals? Mm-hmm. Can you believe that Christ died for your sin, and if you accept his sacrifice now, you are saved? Okay, but what if you believe he wasn't God, he was Metatron or Archangel Gabriel, or even there's a bevy of ideas of who he might be, but he's not God.
Right.
Can you still be saved? Because they can't really answer you.
Right.
Because there is no way to answer that. It sort of presupposes the answer, but then you go back to the question itself. So then it reframes the question, then it reframes the answer. It's an infinite regress of sorts. But can you accept Christ as God, but believe the Holy Spirit is just one of the energies, like some divine force, but not a person? Right, because it doesn't say that. If Romans, it says if you profess that Christ is Lord, you will be saved, etc.
If you pray in his name, then you get what you want.
Right, in his name, by the way, right. It's and only if it's Yeshua, just to be clear.
Yeah.
So if you live in like the Greeks, you don't have a sh sound in your language, you're sort of screwed. Right. But you see, as you said, they have to be philosophical. Yeah. Because they believe it is a checklist of things you say you believe.
And therefore, it's inherently Gnostic. I was talking about this
Absolutely.
with a Calvinist convert at the Orthodox Church recently. Him and his beautiful family. He's clearly been on his journey learning, and he's now trying to get his entire family baptized Orthodox. And they have grown up Calvinist for a long time, then battered around between different Protestant churches. But he was talking about how one of the things that he's really come to appreciate within Orthodoxy, as he's learned more and more about it, and him and his family continue to come to liturgy, is that it's accessible to everybody. And so he was talking about a friend of his who is a Calvinist pastor, and how he started going down bing, 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 bing about like, this is a fact, or you got to believe this, you got to know this, you got to do this. And then he brought up, well, what about the person who's, mentally handicapped or can't understand these highfalutin concepts or doesn't understand the relationship of the Trinity? They can't articulate the hypostatic union. Well, what are you going to do then? And then because of the lack of the bringing together of a true reality, a symbol within the Eucharist, a bridge into the eternal, you're screwed. I mean, how are you gonna? Well, for some people, they think it's predetermined. But for
Doubly.
yeah, for other Protestants who are going to be caught in that sort of same cul-de-sac of thought, is there is no opportunity for people to participate in that reality outside the mind. You've totally relegated the bridge to your belief of God to the mind, which is a Gnostic pursuit for knowledge. And so whether you're talking about these Gematrian, weirdos online, or Protestantism, or the occultist, they're all wrapped up in this worldview where they're kind of like bridging into the transcendent all through the mind. And because of that, it limits really who can participate in there. And it forms these sort of, the symbol then becomes devoid of the
Yes.
reality. They move to one extreme or the other.
Right. And this goes with Age of Reason in like the Catholic Church, where you don't get confirmation until you're a certain age. I can't remember which one exactly. And I've heard a priest say, okay, but what do you do, as you said, with mentally handicapped people? Do they get it because they're a certain age? I mean, why do you have a certain age for reason? Because there are people who probably develop their reason much earlier on, some not to the same level or something, because they have this idea of the intellect being the supreme thing.
Right.
It is about thinking about things and how you think about them. And then they almost divorce action and thinking in a certain way, which is a very strange thing to me. But like temporal guilt, and then you have the I can't remember the term for the other one. But you see, if you're going to relegate everything to the mind, mm-hmm. You have put your language in a self-enclosed system.
Yes.
And you're not going to keep it that way. It's impossible. But you're still going to treat it that way. Yes. And that is going to tint the way you observe, the reality you observe. It's, again, not just pure one-sidedness where you just absorb information.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because as language itself becomes more of a sort of mind process devoid of this sort of transcendent reality, this true symbol system, it makes me think of the archetype of the evil genius, right? So evil is totally operating within the realm of the mind because they've darkened their nous and their heart and their soul so much they're not participating in the bridge that we're talking about, that orthodoxy saying, no, come one, come all. You're going to cross through this bridge. Doesn't matter how smart you are or how dumb you are. That's not the way you cross the bridge into eternity. Whereas as language begins to change, the language itself becomes the language of the evil genius, right? And so then people are all getting sucked into, the transhumanism, the world that we're moving towards, it's all getting people to then think that they're going to cross into that realm through some sort of mind process, and they're going to sign up. They're going to sign up for the technologies that promise them that activity. They're going to be the guinea pigs. But I need to think about that a little bit more. I don't know how far that metaphor goes, but I think it's really interesting that as language itself, look at poetry, for example. I was talking about aesthetics last night with Rachel. Like, the Western culture is so unbeautiful. Even the things that are presented to us as supposed to be beautiful are no longer beautiful. There's no sense of aesthetic. There's no sense of the good, and there's definitely no sense of the true, and they're doing that through the language themselves so that they can redefine everything. So then the map that these people are living in has redefined the true, the media system, the good, virtue signaling, whatever degeneracies on the smorgasbord today. And then the beautiful is a trans black dude who claims to be a woman on Calvin Klein billboard commercials. It's like, what? this is pure evil, and it's seeping into every semiotic system we have to make sure that the reality of the symbol itself doesn't allow us to move back towards the transcendent. It doesn't allow us to move back towards the transcendent God, of which all these symbols are really pointing towards. And so when we think about the Tower of Babel, that's really what then this mindification of language is kind of like this Tower of Babel of getting the map, this single map we're going to move into heaven with, right?
Well, with the Tower of Babel, it's a bit... People take it as a literal changing of language, which it wasn't. It was more about the way language is understood as breaking up this. It is breaking up this giant project to construct what is basically a ziggurat,
Yes.
and try to do
Global
with
unity.
well, it was an attempt to do with God Most High what they tend to do with their little gods, right? The lowercase g gods, where you build this artificial mountain, you put an idol on top, you summon the entity into the idol, so it serves as a body for the spirit, and then you worship it, you clothe it, right? You burn sacrifices to it, etc., etc.,
Kind of like an
etc.
AI God that may or may not be there in the future.
I doubt it. AI is so overplayed. But again, this was type of a spiritual technology, right? They believe that is how they affect. That is how they will affect a reality around them. And the thing I always love to mention is Saint Elijah telling the prophets of Baal, "Well, cry louder," he says. Maybe he is lost deep in thought. Maybe, and it says, I think in the King James Version, maybe he's busy, but in the Hebrew it says basically going to relieve himself. So maybe your God who controls the weather, right? He's the cloud rider, Baal, and whatnot. And maybe he's going to the bathroom. Just he doesn't hear you all that well. So, I don't know how we got to this, but Baal bashing is always a good thing.
Yes. Well, everything ends up there. But we were talking about, again, this transformation of language itself. And, for me, it seems like the map is being constructed for, again, I don't make claims about us being in the end times or how far advanced we are on this trajectory. I do. The only thing I will positively say is that we're closer today than we were yesterday. So that's a fact. When that will be, I'm not sure. But one of the ways that I see, again, the way they're teaching children, as you're talking about these language systems, is the intention to divorce. Not that the people participating are consciously thinking of this, but it is an energetic reality. And because their energies have become weakened, their news is darkened, they're going to be way more susceptible to promoting and buying into these alterations in really consciousness, because of the way that consciousness is flowing through the symbol systems, the map that we're using to look at the world. And so I can't help but think that it is tied to this one world government, new world, or the end times, however you want to describe the end point of this whole process. Wherever we are in the process is irrelevant, but changing language and getting a language to totally map onto that reality, so that when you talk about God, you're talking about a man that's probably transhumanist, or you're not talking about the way that we're even using language right now. It's going to be antiquated more and more and more, so that language itself, the map, isn't even going to be able to recognize the Christian territory that we're trying to describe. That territory is only going to be held within the church that is still maintaining the true faith. Even the church is going to fracture. So make sure you're in the right arc. Make sure you're in the right understanding. That's where knowing the theology, knowing our faith, and then speaking truth is this way. Like Christianity, we don't have esoteric knowledge. And every Gnostic tries to say, oh, well, Jesus had the esoteric teaching for the apostles. bro, you don't understand. This is a different paradigm in relationship to knowledge and language and how it's used. Christianity, and if we understand Christ's message, our job is to proclaim truth as loudly as we can, knowing that the world is going to persecute us for it, because those with the eyes and the ears to see and to hear, they then can make the decision, and their soul then can move towards eternal reality, true truth. Where, so we then are not about keeping secret knowledge, because that would insinuate again this process of the mind being the bridge, the bridge into a sort of transcendental reality. Well, it's secret knowledge. It's something mind. No, ours isn't that. But the language that we use as Christians, our point is to always say what is true, which then is always going to get back to truth being a who, not a what, and us being followers of Christ, and therefore proclaiming truth as loudly and as clearly as we can with our language is how we make sure that we are sort of backed up against God, and we're not falling victim to these linguistic, these false maps that are being constructed in the world right now.
Yes, and one huge problem we have in Western Christianity is that a lot of it is a battle between postmodernists and modernists. So modernists are more like the conservative types, right? Yeah. The one, it is literal 6 days, 24-hour periods, right? And that is how it is because the Bible says so. And apparently John 6 isn't clear at all. It means buying, grape juice and crackers and whatnot. I don't know how much clearer you can be that you're not joking than to say, for my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed.
Yeah.
It even says indeed. But they go with that, and then they abandon all sorts of things, like how the ancients used to write books, that they were very highly tied to worship. Mm-hmm. That is a core part of how they wrote, like the Babel cycle, reading the Babel. It was meant to be ritually participated in. They didn't write a textbook that you can just take certain points out of and analyze on their own.
Right.
They are part of this way of living it.
Right.
And as you said, a lot of these people aren't doing this intentionally or with, malicious intent, at least. Why? Because they are living this life. And as they live a life devoid of God, it's going to be a life more about... There is no actual term for the inverse of theosis, but Father Stephen DeYoung tries to go with demonosis, so I'm going to try and help promote the term.
I like that, demonosis.
Right, become more like the demons,
right.
More like these rebellious creatures.
Right.
That is why there is no middle ground.
Right.
And when you mention symbols, it's not that symbols only speak to you, you read into them. So if I remember correctly, the upside down cross is, in at least certain traditions, known as the cross of St. Peter.
Right.
Demanding to be crucified upside down because he is not worthy of being crucified in the same manner of Christ.
Right.
And you can use the upside down cross as this type of humility towards Christ that St. Peter showed. Or you can use the upside down cross. That means it means the opposite,
right,
of the cross.
Right.
Or the values that the cross represents, self-sacrifice and love and compassion and forgiveness,
right,
and then turn it into the opposite.
Yep.
So it can be both.
Yep.
Not simultaneously, but if you do so with this intention, you are. This is part of what they say. You write a sigil and then you read magic, fill it with energy. It is similar to that, right, but not. Well, I'm not trying to make a comparison.
That example you're giving is perfect to show again the map switching, right? So the one of Peter, the upside down cross, that's from our map. That's a Christian map of understanding again the relationship of the inverted cross. But now the map of the Satanist. 20th century phenomenon. I mean, I think it actually got going in the 19th, 18th, because you had all this magic, Satanism, literal ritualistic Satanism got going in France, in the 1700s, 1800s. So whatever it is, though, they're operating on a different map. In fact, their map is being drawn in contradiction to our map. And so their map is a negative map to some degree, but then their map, we have to then recognize the map that they're using to describe the territory, describe reality, and to understand how that's related to our own world, our own symbol systems.
I remember when this Zach fellow that jumped on Jim Bob's stream, and he is one of these gematria people,
right?
And I saw this interview of Abbot Trifon, right? And he was with Father Seraphim Aldoza, if I remember his surname correctly, on this talking to this some type of evangelical pastor who has this show, and evangelicals do that a lot, and he was interviewing them, and in the interview, when asked how long has he been a monastic for, and he says, about 33 years. And somewhere in the interview, he mentions the two-headed eagle.
Yeah, he took this as like a masonry something, or
not this Zach guy, but someone in the comments. So he says two-headed eagles, 33 years. Oh, come on, don't even joke about it. And I said, if you look at an interview from a year later, he says 34. From a year earlier, he says 32.
Right.
And the eagle is important because that was introduced, as I understand it, by Albert Pike,
right,
as a Masonic symbol.
Yep.
So for centuries and centuries and centuries, it is a symbol of basically the Christianization of the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, some guy decides to make it part of his gay little occult group, and all of a sudden, it's now universally a satanic, Luciferian, at least, symbol.
Right.
So it is usurped. The demons know people fall for it, and that's why they do it, because they're pretty big brain, those demons.
And that's
a bit stupid for rebelling against God. But
well, I'm glad you bring up the like Zach and the Gematrians, because their whole thing is based on using different ciphers to decode reality. Okay, we can just substitute ciphers for maps of reality, that's the way that we've been speaking. So their whole thing is map jumping between maps to decipher the territory, to decipher reality and what's being expressed. And that in itself is then how do you come to know which cipher or which map then is ultimately real? That's, again, we're getting back to the paradigms and everything. But that's why then using Orthodox theology as your map is the only thing that, once you put all those pieces together and you have that map laying out, and then you start to look at the territory of the world itself, things begin to make a whole lot more sense. And that's because you're using a cipher. But this cipher, we don't believe this cipher was created by God, but influenced and led by the Holy Spirit. And so that cipher, then the Orthodox Christian map of the world, of reality, of the territory, then is bringing the two realities together, which, again, these false forms of language are trying to devoid us of, so that you can actually see then the reality at hand, the spiritual war, how this stuff is being influenced, the noetic reality of every single person, and how they're being influenced and essentially darkening their ability to then see the territory as it really is, because your map is condoning your own sin, which from our understanding is, of course, darkening your own noetic faculties, that you don't know which way's up or which way's down, because your map is totally devoid of true direction.
Absolutely. It also ties into our understanding of the nous as a perceptive organ, and not just reducible to what we call the mind.
Right.
Even though the mind in classical understanding was much closer to our understanding of the nous.
Right.
Which is why it the nous, as it was used prior to Christianity in Greek, which meant the mind, why the transition wasn't really a huge one,
Right.
as opposed to what it would have to be today to transition from the idea of what modern idea of the mind to our idea of the nous, which also shows how you can keep the word, but the meaning will completely change.
Exactly. Which shows again this intricacy, what we're trying to talk about. Words, symbols, yes, they are social conventions. The maps, though, are more than just the symbols. There's something really important about these maps of how they're working on us and influencing the territory itself. So, yeah, that's a perfect example. How mind, the concept of mind, and so our theological understanding of nous is fully explicated in regards to this idea that was being historically developed. Same thing with logos. But then as it's moved away, and now mind has totally been redefined from the context of its sort of historical origin.
Well, in Greek and Roman, understandings like these muses or the genius is actually a type of spirit, a genius. So
yeah,
a muse isn't just a whisper in your ear or something. No, they perceived it as an actual entity that influences your mind, because your mind is this type of perceptive organ.
Right.
Now, they lack the nuances and the paradigm of Christianity to fully understand
the moral paradigm, that's how that informs this new evolution and understanding of nous.
Right, but they had a very good idea, a very approximate idea of the mind. And if then your mind becomes just this type of amalgamation of the input from your senses and then your brain interpreting them, this really is going to, it's almost epiphenomenological. This is what we try to argue with these atheists who say, I don't know if you saw Jim Bob's clip calling into Dillahunty. And he asks him what the mind is, and he says, "Oh, it is an emergent phenomenon."
Oh, yeah.
Right. And these people can't really decide on it, because if you don't have this mind, you have this brain that operates, and somehow when you say emergent, everything, you don't have to justify it.
Yeah, you don't have to justify it anymore. It just emerges from the...
Right, no, dude. It is emergent.
That emergent
it's a
property
magic
is telling
word.
me it's an emergent property. Don't you see that's a tautology? You're an idiot, dude. Shut up.
Exactly. I bet Jim Bob was humbled. And,
yeah, he was.
But you see, the problem that develops from that is that, as I said, a lot of Western Christians are basically modernists. So they say, yes, but this is somehow the case, but God somehow clears up the unclear things about describing it. Whereas we, with our understanding of the nous, also can recognize that the darkening of the heart isn't something God does to you.
Right. Oh, this is a great point.
And it is something we do to ourselves all the time, and a lot of it is just that we are actually under protection from a lot of it. So we're playing life on pretty easy mode, to be honest, but as this demonosis, kicks in our paradigm, this is something we do to ourselves by falling for demonic tricks. But if you don't have the idea of the mind as such, you're going to think when it says Pharaoh's heart was hardened, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It isn't something God does to him, but from your preconception, you're going to read the text, and it's going to be obvious to you. I'm reminded of the debate on Friday.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I told you.
Just read it, just read it.
His patience was another level. That guy was, as I said last night to Rachel, I've met more arrogant people and I've met more ignorant people, but he had to be the most arrogant and ignorant together in one person. I
have a joke, but I won't say it. If it were my channel, I would, but I
appreciate
cannot
that.
sacrifice
Thank
you.
Thank
I
you,
cannot
Posh.
sacrifice you. You know, that's not how Christianity works. That's how paganism works, sacrificing someone else. Um, but but even he, you know, he goes into he says breath of life. He doesn't actually say breath of life, but he tries to.
Breath.
And you know, to him, that is, he interprets that as a self-enclosed category.
Right.
Right. So he's going to use it that way. It doesn't matter if you go into, as not just Chase, but callers try to go into. He's saying, oh, you are just using man-made philosophy or fancy words or whatever, because this is the obvious reading. And to go back to our original point, there is no such thing as an obvious reading.
Right.
There is no way for a text to hold authority, because we have heard translation is interpretation, but so is reading.
Right.
So a mathematical formula might be something that you can just read, but as I said, mathematics are an enclosed system, and it can be expanded, right? You can find the discipline of combinatorics, for example, and then you somehow build on it. But it's not going to change from time to time, where 5 is now equal to 7 or something like that, right. Which with language can happen with all sorts of words.
Reminds me of 1984 in regards to just the redefining of truth itself and getting people, when you talk about, well, 5 will never be 7. Well, that's why, let me make a point here. That's why then we have to be so emphatic about not letting our map change, right? So there's too much time, and you hear this within the libertarian, conservative, like the post-enlightenment, like you said, the modernists, which are the conservatists, and then you have the postmodernists, the leftists. But we shouldn't be so worried about changing the maps of our enemies. Let them use whatever damn linguistic maps they want to use to describe the territory, because each person's going to choose their map. You can't force the map on somebody. So the best thing we can do is to learn our map, our theology, our relationship with God. As you said, live it, move it from a sort of cognitive reality to a lived reality, a full symbol, and defending that map is the sort of lifeboats. I made an analogy last night that the Titanic is sinking. We're not going to change the world. If you're an Orthodox Christian, or Christian generally speaking, there is no better world from this point forward. It's going to get worse. It's going to get darker. Doesn't mean your life is necessarily get worse, but the state of global affairs are going to be moving in the direction that is against everything that we hold true. So be aware of that. And since that's the case, we need to defend our map, and our map and defining the perimeters of our map is the lifeboat for these other people that, okay, I need to map switch. I need to realize that the map of the Orthodox Church, the theology, the symbols, this is what's actually describing the territory that we're living in. And that's going to get fewer and fewer numbers. But that map switching and not focusing on the maps of other people, but focusing on not subverting and corrupting our map is the only way that then people can know how to navigate the world.
Yes, it's a type of arrogance to think that you can go and change everyone's mind, or even one person's mind.
That's where, again, the Gematrians, right? Oh, if you just know the information, dude. You totally missed the boat, man. You don't understand.
I wrote in the chat earlier on, he said, one of these Gematrians, stands in, haha, I know you are going to shoot me. I did the calculations and the number and gets shot.
That's hilarious.
But this is what they believe. Again, this is Gnosticism. This is Gnosticism. It is pure noetic processes that have no point in and of themselves.
Yeah, for them, the point for the people who are thinking about, who are adopting these maps, is it is a sort of Gnostic liberation from the world that is, right? So Gnosticism's all about the belief that the world was created by, Beelzebub, Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, the devil, whatever you want to call it. And so therefore the world is bad. We need to escape the world through gnosis, through secret knowledge and my own existential will. Well, devoid the biblical understanding of the world being bad and just the world not being perfect. Well, everybody now is still becoming a Gnostic because it's through not correct knowledge and understanding. And then through your will, you're going to move from the way the world is now into a world that's going to be so much better, so much more transcendent, so much more light.
And also, this is why the innumerable quotes from the saints and elders, talking about how blessed isn't he who can perform miracles or see the angels, but he who can see his own sin. That is not a cheesy quote, like one of those things, a woman would have on her gym locker or something.
Love, hope, laugh.
Yes. It is a literal thing.
Right.
It is a very serious thing to say.
Right.
And it is an instruction that if you don't work on yourself, it doesn't matter if you can't go to an atheist and just quote the Bible.
Right.
Because they don't accept the authority of the Bible. Why would they listen to the Bible? But if I go to an unorthodox Christian, they might believe the Bible and will listen to the Bible, but I also have to give them a reason to listen to me. Right? If I am a Calvinist and just shout at people and call and say things like I can't wait for you to burn in hell and things like that, which they are wont to do, people are going to see that it is demonic.
Right.
Even atheists probably. They're going to move away from that. But that is also because as we get transformed more and more by theosis, this is going to reflect in our behavior. So the way we behave brings us into a closer connection to God. Yeah. It is working with God's grace. And that affects what we do next. So you see, it's a loop of sorts,
right?
But not a loop as in that it just self-reinforcing, but it grows. It's like a spiral, you see, but going from the inside out, it becomes broader and broader and broader.
Right.
That is why they say things like that. It's not like, oh, stop being judgmental and things like. As I said, more slogans than actual theological points. And again, it will affect the map. And I just thought, I don't know how many jokes about maps were made in the chat, because if I was listening, I would be making those. But that's maybe a me problem.
Hey, if you're into maps of that sort, that's definitely a you problem. No, but even that, you see, that is a perfect example of the redefining of map. Right? We actually should have played off that a little bit more in this stream that we didn't, because for what he's pointing at is map is now a term for a minor attracted person, aka a pedophile. And that's perfectly indicative of what we're talking about in regards to the linguistic map that describes the territory changing. Well, pedophile, ooh, no, but a minor attracted person? Oh yeah, well they're now a sexual category and they're marginalized, you white cis heterosexual man. Ugh. And so what that is a redefining of the semiotic processes to normalize things, which is part of this map inversion, and creating a new map of reality that is inverted to the map that we're trying to describe as the Orthodox Church, as a true understanding, a true linguistic semiotic process of bringing transcendent reality with immanent reality together, so that we can then participate in a phenomenon of which, being made in the image, we can understand both.
I do support the inversion of maps, but it involves millstones and large bodies of water.
Agreed on that one. I'll second that notion. And one of the things too about these maps is that's why shout out to Jim Bob. What like his comics are such subtle ways to map jump, right? In regards to because people don't realize it's so subtle, right? If you watch some of or look at some of his comics and then they laugh or they get it, what they're doing is he in a way is using symbolic systems outside the control of the person that looks at it. Because if you laugh, what he just did is he just sort of map corrected you. And so he took symbols of whatever map you're at. If you look at a Jim Bob meme and you laugh, what he's doing is reconstructing the relationship of semiotic processes in your map to show you something that is true. That is what a symbol is, right? The bringing together of two realities. And so it's such a beautiful and subtle way to get people to jump maps. And they're not thinking that's what they're doing at all, but that's really what they're doing, because one joke insinuates an entire process of semiotic associations.
Exactly. And a comic is a concentrated, it is packed with symbology, whereas as icons are, like the ones behind you, in fact, I'll just go for like Christ wears red and blue.
Yes.
And he wears red on the inside and then blue on the outside.
Right there. Yeah, red divinity, blue humanity. Where Mary's the opposite, blue with red on top.
Right, but actually, red isn't actually divinity per se. It is royalty. It is vermilion. Right, or vermilion, if people like to. It is a royal color, sure. Right? It is something because we wouldn't say she became God.
No, but it's divine nature. So the way that I've understood or read it in an Orthodox book on icons was that red was symbolic of divine nature, and so people having red on the outside was the process of theosis being insinuated.
Yes, it is also that, but it comes from this Greco-Roman culture, where you have this very expensive color that is produced. There's also the Byzantine blue and all sorts of things, I mean, but it is that she is garbed now with it. And it is, as I said, royalty is supposed to be a reflection of divinity.
Right. So you can easily make that semiotic association for sure.
Yes. So I'm not saying one is right or it's somehow parallel.
Right. No, I wasn't either. I was saying that was the basis for me saying that.
Right. So again, we call her the Queen of Heaven. Technically, in Slavic languages, we call her the Empress of Heaven. But it is something that you show. As you said, it is the inverse between Christ and her, that she becomes this royalty higher than the angels and the thrones and the seraphim and cherubim and whatever. And you represent that with a simple color. Mm-hmm. But that does not mean that there is something inherent in redness or blueness that is going to just show it. But if you have that understanding, an image, just that part of an icon, and icons, I'm not a big student of icons. It's actually a very delicate and complex way of producing art.
Yeah.
But it is so packed with symbolism.
Oh, great point. Yes.
Like, when we talk about Jim Bob's comics, it is something that is supposed to speak so much with so little. So that is what I was going for. And icons are supposed to do that.
Well, they exactly, like the iconography of the Orthodox Church. These are tiles leading to the map, right? Our map is embodied, like, again, all these locks and keys. Well, now you can understand the harrowing of Hades, because of the difference between, the Pharisees and then the regular Jews, and understanding him standing on the doors of Hades and they're forming a cross. And so he conquered it through so many semiotic associations with every single icon. What's that doing? It's making sure that the map is maintained, and that these icons then are gateways into our Orthodox map, just as Jim Bob's comics are gateways into a more normative map of reality. Now, he's not obviously bringing people into the Orthodox paradigm, but that's not his point, and it shouldn't be. What he's doing is bringing people into a semiotic association, which is eventually going to make this map make a hell of a lot more sense if you jump from that general map then to a more specific map. It's like maps, the specificity and accuracy of the map can change. So the map that Jim Bob's getting people to jump to is way more accurate than the one that they're already from. But that map can also become more specific and more nuanced in the way that it's describing the territory itself.
Exactly. So it's like learning new words in a language. It doesn't change the language itself, but it allows for so much more expression, more detail, more clarity, more profundity.
Right.
We were a bit all over the place, but it was still in the general ballpark. So what else can we talk about?
I mean, we hit on a lot of the major points that we were interested in regards to, so here is a point that I was going to make earlier that I didn't make. This is something that Father Josiah Trenum was talking about, is that one of the difficulties so keeping this concept of map jumping and maps generally speaking, when you're referring to the concept of mind, nous, and how the ancients, Plato had a more accurate understanding than, say, your average person on the street now that understands here's the word mind, that Father Josiah Trenum made a point that unlike the ancient pagan world, they believed in prayer. They believed in spirits. They believed in transcendent reality. The secular world that we live in now, the map is actually more different than their Christian map. Whereas in the ancient world, all the maps were sort of clarifying itself so that when the true map became available, people could see it as it truly is. And then the maps got more distorted and distorted from that point forward. The Great Schism, I would point to as a great point in which the map becomes more and more ambiguous. And to the point now where the secular map, it's more difficult for us to build those bridges for those people because they don't believe in a transcendent reality. They don't believe in the efficacy of prayer or language itself. They are lost within a map of an emotional hedonism navigating the world. And so this is a really interesting point, too, in regards to a sort of trapping of the map of territory. If you're getting people, one's to be overly rationalistic, but another point is where people aren't even rational. They're irrational, and they're moving through the map in the territory purely based on their emotions. And that would be the worst map to be on because that's the easiestly manipulated person to be operating on a map in which they're navigating the territory itself purely based on the interior emotions that they experience.
Yes, this is similar to how in the Scandinavian countries, like gender differences get more announced, as far as like choosing professions, because there is, in essence, in reality, there is a difference between men and women. And as you remove strictures, you're not going to get them more closer. You're going to get them more actually crystallized. They're going to become more separate. It's going to announce that which is actually there. Whereas if you have these structures, or even like structural problems, like if the question is, how do you feed your family? Mm-hmm. You're not going to try and go with your whims. You're going to go for what pays best, or maybe you can't afford to go to university for 10 years, to get a doctorate or something. So maybe that is going to affect things. But as that becomes less of a stricture, you're going to get more of your nature. Mm. So similar to what you were talking about, these people who don't recognize spiritual realities, as they reject them, they are actually going to become more affected by spiritual realities. Maybe that's not going to be as advanced as, you're going to have priests of Baal. But it is still a spiritual reality that they are living in. And the lack of recognition, the lack of strictures that would even exist in pagan communities or systems of thought,
Right.
it is still going to manifest more and more and more, especially as we see it today, as the inertia of Christianity starts to fade more into the background. So we are seeing the loosening of a recognition of spiritual reality, and that is ironically probably creating just a more spirituality in a negative sense.
Right. No, I love
because it all starts to seep in.
Yeah, the point you made, I want to tie that back again to the tribe who doesn't have the word for the color blue. Doesn't mean blue doesn't exist. Blue is a color that does exist on the visible color spectrum. So what these people are doing as they move deeper into the secular worldview that sort of rejects some of this stuff, they absolutely are going to be led more and more by demons. I couldn't help but think, JF last night in the debate with Spirit Man, at least, he's talking about, great points in regards to CRISPR and all this different stuff, where Spirit Man, again, this idea of total progress, again, but he's not secular, very, very spiritual, but at the same time, that worldview is leading in that same general direction. And so the map that you're on is going to highlight, things that you can see and things that you can't see. You need to make sure that your map is highlighting things that are real. And so as they move deeper into it, they are going to be more and more susceptible. And so unlike the ancient world where there's priests for Baal, what I see eventually happening is everybody worshiping themselves. That seems to me like the most logical conclusion. Say, fast forward the processes that are happening for the next 20 to 40 years, that there will be all these forms of spirituality as you're describing, but they're all going to be that Gnostic impetus of existentialism and of focusing on the mind, and then a redefining of the map in which they are essentially their own object of veneration. And that then is the full recapitulation, as I've said 1,000 times, of Lucifer falling as Satan, which is the end time, process. Everybody's becoming him. That's their spirituality now, is that not that they're totally conscious of it, but they're on a progressive agenda, progressive progress, a dialectical, fulfillment of the full spirit. Well, what they are leading towards that phenomenon. And that's how he's capturing souls, because that's what this is all about. This is literally about life and death. It couldn't even be more serious than what it is about. And so, I see that being the most likely phenomenon is you wouldn't even need a bunch of priests. What you need is just these general ideologies for people then to adopt that map, venerate themselves, and they're going to naturally fall in line with the Antichrist. They're going to naturally fall in line with the one world order, because the whole worldview naturally privileges the unity over the multiplicity. There is no both and. So it's their self-worship which brings them into the sort of collective community of other people that are doing the exact same thing.
I'm snickering because when you said they don't need priests, I just thought naturalism is low church Satanism.
It's true, right?
Right. So they have the pastors, right? The Darwins and Neil deGrasse Tysons of the world. They're not really priests; they're just pastors.
That is, dude, I'm going to start saying that. That's hilarious. Once you see it, that is an accurate sort of association analogy there.
Absolutely, and again, it's communion. The community is going to affect itself. And it's going to fall more and more. I shouldn't get into angelology or demonology now, but as we speak of demons, when we say they govern things, as we say, the prince of this world is Satan or something. Again, this is the way we are a nous that is integral to who we are, but also has other components like the body. And the body has all sorts of components in and of itself. Mm-hmm. We have foreign organisms within us, in the gut, flora and fauna. We have involuntary reactions because there are systems within our bodies that react to certain stimuli, to certain sounds, certain sensations. When you prick your hand, you don't prick your hand and say, "Oh, I am now going to pull away my hand and cuss." It just happens. And the nous both is over that, in a sense, but it governs the entire thing and can override it. Mm-hmm. You can do something incredibly stupid, even though your entire body is basically screaming, "Don't do it."
Yes.
But in the same way, these angelic, fallen, especially angelic creatures, they are this nous, as they say, they are higher order noetic beings. When they govern a place, it's not like a red half goat man, running around or something. No, they are this noetic being that somehow integrates communities, basically, in and of itself. That is what mobs do. That is why rituals were so massive. That is what they call mob mentality. Now they've got this phrase, mass formation psychosis.
Yeah, mass formation psychosis. Well, I mean, Emil Durkheim, the father of sociology, when he studied religion, he called it collective effervescence. And he talked about how when people come together in groups, they can experience collective emotions, and that this collective emotion is a form of communal solidarity, and that we crave that. And so I think that is totally accurate. And when you look at sports, that's exactly what people are looking for, is that collective solidarity of a shared emotion. So when your team scores the goal or the winning touchdown, that excitement then is shared amongst people, and that is a sort of collective communal experience that, in a way, transcends language. It is something that is shared and experienced amongst people, and and so that collective effervescence, that's what they're manipulating through the propaganda, through the emotions, through like the coof. I mean, that's what that stuff is playing on the collective effervescence of people and how we want to feel emotional solidarity with people. So if you're afraid, oh, maybe I'm afraid, maybe I should wear my mask too, and so it's a reverse engineering of these things that we kind of crave.
Right, but I'm saying it's not purely materialistic, right? It's
the collective effervescence or the shared...
Right.
Yeah, no, it's not material. This is a spiritual...
There is a...
Yeah.
And spiritual, as in like beings, actually spiritual beings who participate in it.
Beings made in the image of God, because that is a remnant of our communion. Right, in a way we're having...
No. I still mean angelic beings and demons and all of that.
Hold on.
There is...
Well, what are you talking about? I thought we were talking about like shared collective emotions.
Yes, but I'm saying this is sort of how this superimposed, when we consecrate something to let's say, a saint or an angel, right? This is sort of taking back territory that was previously under demonic influence.
Oh, agreed.
Okay, so that is why we do it. It's literally recapturing that which sort of God pulling back after Babylon. He sort of recedes back and assigns, nations to angelic creatures, and those creatures fall, and things go very much awry. But I'm saying those spirits have that type of influence. You cannot explain it fully materialistically. This is what I don't like, when many Christians fall almost into this like evolutionarily we have developed this and that and all the other, and they try to go for a materialistic explanation of something that is a spiritual reality.
Right.
If we look at what the Orthodox Church teaches about angels and demons and all of that, we see all of those things as higher order beings who influence us. But at the same time, God influences us. Good angels influence us. We have guardian angels. And our nous is either going to focus on things of God or things of demons.
Right.
no middle ground. And as we form, you see, it then seeps out.
Yes.
So there are actual influences, and I mean that more because we're talking about language and the map of how we perceive things. This is something that truly, if we recognize it, it truly should bring more understanding as to why certain parts of the world are particularly heinous in certain regards. You know, the realities we see in India or parts of Africa or South America, and things as they roll, it's a snowballing effect, both Christianity and this demonic reality. Right. So as we are seeing Christianity recede, we are seeing a growth in the demonic.
Oh, absolutely.
And that has an actual reality to it.
Yes.
It's not as, you know, I almost said symbolic. It's not just a figure of speech.
Right.
It is an actual thing that happens. And so all of that to say, cling to the saints and to God.
Yes.
Because there are entities out there who really are out for your destruction.
Right. And tying what you just said back to my discussion on collective effervescence, I think that's exactly what, you know, people like Beyonce, who then goes on stage as Sasha Fierce, who claims that there's a, you know, she has a personality alteration, that the demons are literally working through some of these, again, selling their soul, working through celebrities, our astrological system, the stars, to navigate the world, that these demons want to be the ways in which one navigates. They want to be the pillars on the roadmap, right? The map itself, so then Beyonce or Lady Gaga or whoever, the people who go to those concerts are affected. I would argue that a collective effervescence, that emotionalism, is also a very vulnerable place. Emotions themselves open you up to potential realities that you're not aware of. So that's why you have to be so, you know, not everybody has to be stoic, but at least conscious of your emotional life and your emotional reality. And so tying with what you say, I think that's exactly that recession of Christianity and that growth of the demonic of Babylon the Great. It's happening right now, and it's happening, of course, through demons, but demons then do it through persons, and then the people who are, you know, on these different maps, then the goal of the magicians is to establish the various false forms of astrological gods, you know, the stars, so that people navigate their life based on those stars and fall victim to exactly what you're talking about, the darkening of the noose, and eventually there's a point of no return. You know,
right? And these magicians themselves, they are deceived.
Yes,
all like, humans are all deceived. This is why when St. Paul says we do not, you know, fight against flesh and blood, yep. You know, or forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do. And the proto-martyr Stephen also says that. Why? Because this isn't like they know the story of the Bible, they believe it, but they're on the side of the devil.
Right.
Right? No, they have this warped idea, like the Gnostic idea that Yahweh is this lesser God who is trying to imprison people and destroy our liberties. And then there's, is that Sophia, this divine wisdom, not as we would see divine wisdom, but
that
this
gives
goddess.
birth to it's Sophia.
And tries to liberate us, and it's all, they have these types of warped views.
Right.
So they are still tricked.
Yes.
And that is why we pray for people and we love our enemy.
Right.
We're not told pray for Satan to repent. Because he's not tricked.
Yeah, he's not. That's exactly the point I wanted to make, is that it's only him that recognizes the aversion to Christ directly. Like, as you're talking about, I don't think the people, Beyonce or Lady Gaga or whoever, may or may not sell their soul in one way. They may know what they're doing to some degree, but it's not like this conscientious or conscious fight against Christ or God. It's the darkening of their nous. It's the darkening of their noetic faculties to the point where they're so warped. That's the only thing that makes sense, is to pursue their own power, to pursue their own pleasure. everything else, they wouldn't be able to make the cognitive leap to even, they couldn't make that map jump, right? They can't jump to that map anymore. They would have to potentially jump to another map, eventually work their way there, but that would then be their journey, their redemptive arc out of where they've been. That would be based on their repentance and their morality and all that stuff. So I think you're totally right, and that it's only Satan that is total, and he's in eternity, right? So he has a foot in eternity and a foot in temporality, and he knows how this thing ends. He already knows. That's why the game is on for in time to get as many souls as possible. That's the whole thing, because that's how he is God. He is showing that he's God to God. Of course, he's not, by showing how corruptible the human species is and how many souls he's going to be able to take with him.
Yes, it is this idea of Milton that God is trying, that Satan is trying to overthrow God in the sense that he's now going to become the master of the universe. No, Satan isn't retarded, all the other fallen angels, etc. The reason they don't repent is, again, they know what they're doing fully, but still do it. And as
that
you
is
said,
demonic, right? That's what we would call
Absolutely.
somebody who's acting demonic. Somebody who, like a Jeffrey Dahmer, why would you say, oh man, that dude, he is gay and demonic? That
so demonic and demonic.
And everybody's loving that new documentary and obsessing over it and watching it. And what you're doing is you're taking in that energy, that map of reality. I want to know why he did all that stuff, and I want to learn his map. Well, why would you want to learn his map? It doesn't matter what his map is. And somebody who does something consciously, knowing the outcome, as you said, as we're pointing out with the Satan and the demons, that is what makes somebody demonic. That's why we call them demonic, is their straight out aversion to doing what's good and knowing the difference.
Yes, absolutely. And again, the demonic endpoint is just to drag as many people along with them as they can. When Christ says to Satan, "Do not tempt thy Lord God," he is not sort of like stoically standing there and giving us instructions as what we should do. He is, in a sense. But when he says that, Satan knows who he is. So it's basically like saying, don't. I wanted to tie this into something else. Sorry, it's getting a bit late, so my mind is...
Well, we can wrap up here. I know that is late for you.
Yes, it's midnight.
Yeah, well, again, let's wrap it up here. And thank you again, brother, for hopping on here. We got some super chats maybe we can dive into, but really appreciate you coming on and chatting about this topic. I'm sure it was useful for people to think more deeply about language as a cognitive map, and one that is a cognitive map that's really a blessing from God. And the fact that Adam is naming the animals is demonstrating God's sort of condoning and privileging of our sort of linguistic faculty and how we relate to nature and how we relate to him through language as being made in the image of God, and how magic and Christianity have a very similar concept of how language and these maps are orchestrated and how they then affect the territory. For those watching, then we were talking about Alfred Korzybski, the father of general semantics, and how the state of modern academia and linguistic philosophy is that language are symbols sort of devoid of a reality, and that there's a Kantian distinction between the actual territory, and so we just live in the map. And we didn't even get into E prime. I was going to talk a little bit about E prime, but that's fine. We hit so many good things. And so concluding, that's why we were focused so much on this sort of map jumping and the influence of the maps and the linguistic constructions and words, and that they are cultural conventions, but they're not empty of reality. They're not the same thing as the thing they symbolize, but in a way they're almost a priori to the thing that they symbolize. And we pointed that out with the tribe not being able to see blue because there was no word in their language for that color, and how then this, as we manipulate language, especially within English, how this is going to especially affect young kids, kids that are unborn now. The manipulation of language, it's the kids that are going to be born in 10 to 20 years, that they're going to be being birthed into a map of language, a linguistic map of reality, I should say, that there's going to be a lot of things that they cannot see initially because they don't have words for, and most likely it's going to be attributes of our map, the map that we believe as Orthodox Christians that God gave us to navigate reality as it really is.
Yes, and our duty is to navigate it. Our duty is to promote it and to live a life as images of God, imagers, I should say. So, and part of all of that is how we use what God has given us, and the ability to speak is a near universal thing. There are exceptions, and which, with such a universal faculty and such a powerful one, we are to try and use it for not just for having deep intellectual discussions, of course. Just talking to people who are in pain, talking to people who are suffering from something, trying to help out, offering words of comfort. This is all something that God has tasked us with doing, and these broken worldviews, like Kossipski, these naturalistic, materialistic worldviews, they don't even account for the ability to think.
Right.
Let
All you're
alone
doing is symbols are moving around based on chemical processes across neurons.
Exactly. So we should not get lost in the weeds of that.
Right.
I study linguistics because I like it, and I think I can use it for good things. It's what we are told, that each person has a gift and they should use it for God, as in to be an imager of God, because God doesn't actually really need us to do it.
No.
But he has created us with that purpose, and with language being one of the great gifts that we are given, I hope people use it to bring more glory to him, and I don't know if there's
I think that's
something better to end on.
a great way to end it. I mean, we hit so many good topics and brought a lot in there that I'm sure it's going to be useful for people. Again, thanks again, brother, for coming on here. We'll definitely have to do more.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. First super chat comes from our good buddy Theoria Zone, throws in $5 and no message. So thank you so much, Theoria Zone. God bless you. Next one comes from, this one's for you, Posh, from Dr. Crispy Johnson, our beloved internal medicine doctor here in the live chat. So Crispy wants you to, so throws in 988, and he says, Posh, can you please sing happy birthday for Kristen, Slowboy Whiteboard in the live chat, in Serbian? Today is her birthday.
Christine or Kristen?
Kristen.
Okay. What's our okay, I think that's a nice I ended on using gifts, so I sort of put myself in this position where I can't escape. So our song isn't exactly as your song, but I will bloody hell. Okay, if I think about it, it makes it worse. So, danas nam je divan dan, divan dan, divan dan, našoj Kristen rođendan, 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 živela, živela I srećna nam bila, živela, živela I srećna nam bila.
That was great, brother. That was phenomenal. That's awesome. I'm sure Kristen's here. She's in the live chat. I'm sure she's loving that. Of course, we're 20 seconds behind, or 20 seconds ahead. They're behind.
Now that I've done that, it's going to invite more super chats to do things like this.
I'm sure that it will. I'm sure that it will. Now every time somebody has a birthday, they're going to be hopping on Jim Bob's stream to try to get you to sing happy birthday in Serbian. I'll tell you what, you have a beautiful voice, though. God bless that voice.
Thank you.
Jim Bob said, is that song supposed to make me want beer?
all songs in Serbian are supposed to make you want beer.
Well, shout out to Kristen. Happy birthday. She says, thank you, Posh. Thanks, Crispy. So Crispy bought that super chat for her. So thank you so much, Posh, for doing that. I'm sure that is going to be a memorable event for her, that time that Posh sang her happy birthday in Serbian. So thank you very much, brother. Keenan throws the next super chat. Keenan throws in $10, no comment. Well, thank you so much, Keenan. Shout out to Keenan's Beats. Again, it makes incredible music. Click his link in the video description. Use his stuff quite often for introductory music and videos. So shout out to Keenan Beats with the $10 super chat. And next one comes from Dr. Vagisil. Throws in $1. So Dr. Vagisil, he says, thank y'all for continued help in the faith. Sad I missed my fellow doctor on Sunday. Next one is from Dr. Vagisil as well. He throws in another $1. Dr. Vagisil says, Symbology is important not only in the church but also the culture war. Icons are beautiful and communicate to people of any education level. That is true. Hollywood pollutes people's eyes with lust instead of graffiti buildings having images of the saints and gods we love. Well, I can agree with that. Dr. Vagisil, you made very rational, agreeable comment there. I appreciate it, Dr. Vagisil. I hope your work is going well and everybody's avoiding their infections. Dr. Vagisil throws in another super chat for $1 and says, I feel bad for the iconoclast denominations. How can non-Christians know they are in a church without the full experience and smell and sight, icons, incense, people who would feel more at peace seeing images of saints on buildings instead of ads and boobs?
That is a point of our understanding of church attendance, that we are supposed, our entire being is supposed to be participating in worship. That's why I mentioned, bowing and things like that. But also incense engages the smell. Candles also to a lesser extent. And we have the icons for visual focus, right? Behind the iconostas, behind the altar, we tend to have this fresco or icon of Christ enthroned, right? It can be either like the one to your left, or sometimes it is, and sometimes it is Christ as a child enthroned in the lap of the Most Holy Theotokos. We call her also a divine throne. Mm-hmm. And that is literally what she represents, a divine
and
throne.
She is the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes. And again, that is the focal point that we can look to in when we worship
that's
him.
usually why there's an icon of her behind the altar, symbolizing that relationship, correct?
Yes. Again, with Christ enthroned in her lap.
Yes. Yeah. Usually there's again, a lot of the churches, the beautiful churches around here is behind, there's usually a domed, like the backdrop, again, the church. And on that point, it's almost like she's looking down on the altar itself. And it's usually...
Yes. If you have the architecture that permits that, it's absolutely gorgeous.
It's a phenomenal aesthetic. And usually it is a Christ child, and then it's the Theotokos sort of looking over the altar. You can't look at the altar without seeing her behind it. And once you understand her as the Ark of the Covenant and how God came through her, like, now you can make that association and see how we are the continuation of the Old Testament. We are Israel. This isn't some radical break-off, but a continuation and, for lack of a better word, a sort of evolving into the correct understanding or the correct map of reality.
Maybe we say fulfillment.
Yes, better word than evolve, for sure.
Can I make a short point there? Because
you may make a short point, of course.
It is used when Christ came to fulfill the law, and people sometimes take that as basically it's done, it's finished. No, fulfilled means filled to overflowing, right? So he brings it into the fullness of the law. The law wasn't there to just be a set of rules to follow as a type of magic. It is there again to guide people and to keep Israel in the ways. Doesn't really work, does it? Especially the northern kingdom, but the Judah wasn't much better. So it was there to set them apart and keep them in the ways of the Lord. But it also, when Christ says Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, right? It is these things that are supposed to put us more focused on God. And in the New Testament, with the Messianic age, that takes on a different form and a fuller form. But also, again, it is not a change per se. It is the fulfillment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then we talked about that even with the nous and the development from Platonic understanding to Orthodox understanding. Logos, another way. Once you have the eyes to see, you can see all these things being fulfillments of, and moving towards, and being prefigurations of. And so, yeah. But again, you have to be using the right map to see how the territory is pointing towards it. So, totally indicative of everything we said today. Great point. Great point. Next super chat comes from Storm the Cat. Throws in $10 and says, hello. Hello, Storm the Cat. Thank you very much. God bless you, brother, for the $10 super chat. Hope all is well with you and yours. Next one comes from Sarah from Goose. Throws in $20 and says, allow me to honor you with my first super chat ever. Well, thank you so much, Sarah from Goose. The first super chat ever is a $20 banger here on YouTube. Thank you so much, Sarah from Goose. God bless you, brother. I've seen you in the live chat for a long time, so I'm humbled and honored that you would choose a super chat today. It must be Posh's presence here. You're just overwhelmed and you feel obligated. Well, you know, he has that effect on people. So thank you very much, Sarah from Goose. God bless you, brother. And it looks like our last super chat comes from Eric G for $5. This is a question that could be bounced around by both of us. I'll let you handle it first. He says, so what is Satan's purpose exactly? He's probably heard us talking about the maps and Satan.
Yes.
So how do you want to approach that question? So what is Satan's purpose exactly?
Well, I'm not sure if the question is purpose of him being created or his purpose as in his goal.
Right. Well, make that distinction for him, because clearly the framing of the question is a lack of understanding of the Orthodox paradigm that God didn't create Satan to do what he's doing now. That was never the intention. So lay out what you have to say, and then I'll bounce off whatever you lay out.
All right. So first and foremost, angels have free wills. So he rebelled, and in our understanding, he rebelled out of envy, not for God, but for man. Because otherwise, there is no point being envious of God. He is literally, he's not just everything, he is more than everything. So,
right.
But the idea is, God created man to be higher than the angels. But this was supposed to be this process. When the scriptures say we are made in the image of God, that also means we are to be imagers of God. We are to do his works. Right. That is why he creates things and says everything is good. But then he says to Adam and Eve, go into the earth, and subdue it, and things like that, because things are made in such a way that to grow eternally, to be become more and more filled with God. And that is the purpose of the angels in a different function, but for a man specifically to be the imager of God, and through that rise and grow and ultimately outgrow the angels.
Right.
Satan wasn't a big fan of this idea. Again, his original purpose was like the purpose of all the angels, to participate in this governance of creation. Not because God needs help, but because that is literally the point of existence. He wants us to share in it, right, in our limited created capacity.
Right.
So Satan basically tricks Adam and Eve so that they would stumble. They were naive. They weren't, they weren't really tricked by appealing to some type of corruption, but it is more like tricked because they were naive.
Mm-hmm.
And he abuses that as someone with
And I've
the
heard the
knowledge.
metaphor within Orthodoxy say that, like Maximus the Confessor points out that the reason why Adam and Eve couldn't eat from the tree of knowledge is not that we were never going to eat from it. It's that you don't give steak to a child. And so in their adolescent state, us being post-Christ incarnation are actually at a more privileged place than Adam and Eve were. Because they were in a very adolescent state of God's intention for humanity, and that's why they cannot participate in these more adult-oriented activities, you could say.
Exactly, they were still undeveloped in these matters. Yes, all God created things to be good. So the only way something can be bad is if it is misdirected. Mm-hmm. And that is what Satan did with Adam and Eve, and things don't get much better from there. Up until a certain point, it will not get much better than that. But ultimately, God is in control. But that's basically it now. As things develop and more angels fall. We get the Nephilim, the unclean spirits that arise from the dead Nephilim,
Right.
All of this plays a part, but that's the basics of it. He is trying to destroy man because that is how the only way he can hurt God is to hurt his creation.
Right.
He can't do anything to God himself.
Right. You pretty much nailed it. To summarize basically what you said, because Eric G made a comment clarifying in the live chat that he wanted to know from the Orthodox perspective. So I think it sounds like he's probably Protestant or trying to understand how we understand Satan. And so basically everything that you said, it's important to note one of the differentiations between our map, our paradigm, and most other forms is that Satan is not evil is not a positive dimension to reality. And so it's the absence of God's energy. You're talking about theosis and all this stuff. And so, like you said, his whole purpose is to undermine humanity, because if theosis, which is a fundamental doctrine which is going to change our understanding of Satan's purpose, it's to prevent us on this theotic journey to become divinized by God's grace and to become like what God is by nature, we can come by through grace. He is here to undermine that. And so his reality and the demon's reality is trying to snare us to be trapped into the same pit of despair, of darkness, that has none of the uncreated energies of God. So when you think of truth, logic, love, honor, glory, compassion, mercy, these are all energies, energetic realities that have to be expressed energetically, that only between persons. And so Satan is interested in inverting all these because he, by definition, can't participate in them. So there is no truth in Satan. There is no love. There is no mercy. There is no compassion. There is no honor. There is no glory. And there is no logic. There is no reason. So these things ultimately become inverted in the negative dimension of their positive attribute. And so the purpose of Satan, there is no ultimate purpose than him being indicative of the man with daddy issues who then is pursuing his own will to show daddy how much greater he is and get other people to worship him as whatever, daddy was a great man and he's upset and he wants to be that great man. And so that's a very crude example or analogy. But Satan is not competing with God. This is one of the problems of Protestantism, is they try to frame it in a dualistic sense that Satan is up there, he's battling with God's will, and God's he's gonna give him an uppercut right at the end there, and that's when Jesus comes for the second. No, stop. Satan he's on our level. And in fact, our journey, if you're following Christ, is beyond the level that they're on, the angelic realm. And so we, only God sitting at the right hand of the Father, Christ, is a man, as me and Posh are right now, with that flesh, with those genitals. Like, we are what God is inside of eternity right now. He's not an angel. He's not a seraphim. He's not, he's not a cherubim. He is a man, and he is God. And so we then are at a very high understanding within Orthodoxy. The whole point is for our divinization, our relationship with Christ, and becoming more and more like him. Satan's purpose is just to trap us and make sure we don't progress on that journey because he's jealous.
Right, and he has a lot of ways of doing so. So we have to be very careful.
Amen.
As I said, the angels are higher beings than us, and I said for now, but we take reality as it is. There's no point in trying to do anything but grow in Christ through his grace, through his energies and participation in his church and doing his works. That is our purpose, and that is the purpose that God shows us that his idea of hierarchy is.
Yep.
That hierarchy of service. So the good angels, when they realize that we are going to be higher than them, they are rejoicing.
Right.
So because there is no reason why they wouldn't.
Right.
We're all going to be buddies and hanging out, So hierarchy isn't this thing of dominion and oppression, as unfortunately it is for now because we are fallen. But once we are healed, hierarchy isn't a thing of higher order, so you get to command people and stuff like that. Don't confuse it. Also, why there isn't like an inverse angelic hierarchy. Like Satan is the evil god, and his angels, the phrase is used for Satan and his angels, but not in the sense that, because hierarchy is a good thing. Obedience is a good thing, because it requires humility. Demons, not very big on humility.
Right. And I mentioned that's why Satan's hierarchy is continual backstabbing, which maintains his position at the top of that pyramid, but also demonstrates the difference between a true hierarchy of authoritative submission to competency and authority, right? Whatever military hierarchy, political, obviously God's hierarchy being indicative of all hierarchies. And then theirs is inverted, where it's not on competency. It's basically led by jealousness of wanting to be in front of the person in front of you on the hierarchy. And that's what maintains its form, is everybody moving from the bottom and wanting to be the top. They can't get to the top, so then it's just the entire thing's self-destructive. I'll give lip service. We got Andrew in the chat, and he says, Posh, if you had to assign an ethnicity to Satan, hypothetically speaking, which would be the closest to it?
Oh, God.
We'll refrain for that. We don't want a Kanye moment or anything like that.
We should have a bleep moment.
Shout out to Andrew and Rachel Wilson. God bless you both and the family.
Absolutely.
Aaron throws in $5 and says, I wanted to say that the icon above the altar of the Theotokos is also called the mercy seat. Thanks for the discussion.
Okay, I'm not too familiar with all the terminology in English because, Serbian and all that.
Sure. And then it looks like our last and final super chat comes from Dr. Vagisil again. Appreciate it, brother. I'm glad you've been able to find some free time in between patients. Throws in $1 and says, Posh needs to collab with Jim Bob on one of his cartoons or something. Great content in the making. Have a blessed evening. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Vagisil. Bless you as well. I've seen that you've been producing a few more memes. Is there a potential collaboration between you and Jim Bob? I mean, it sounds like both you guys are doing fine as is. I mean, Jim Bob, it's amazing how he comes up with his cartoons. People, they will mention to me, how do you come up with your topics? Well, I think the same thing about Jim Bob is like, man, that's so clever. How'd you come up with like some of his comics? So.
Right, even when we talk about things, me and him, we come across a certain topic. He has a way to, reduce it, as in like boil it down to such a concentration that even if I was there as part of the process, I feel like I contributed like 3% at most. So artistic people are like a phenomenon to me.
I want to give a special shout out to Jay Dyer in the chat. God bless you and Jamie, brother. Looking forward next time we can hook up. Appreciate everything you do. Looks like Jay has a stream tonight, so go check out Jay Dyer. Later, he says they are going to be live afterwards tonight. So God bless you, Jay and Jamie. Really appreciate everything you guys do for the community, for your work. Really appreciate you guys. Shout out to both of you. And that's going to do it for us. Posh, is there anything you want to say before hopping off here?
Nothing in particular. It's a massive topic and a very weird one, very self-referential one because of the nature of language. So if we ever get into like more applied things, that could be a good topic. As I said, I wanted to show with certain letters and symbols and how, depending on in different languages, it manifests in this way and that way, but it still ties in. But it seems that's going to have to be a topic in and of itself.
Well, that'll be a part two. That can be a part two, getting into more nuanced things. I think we hit a lot of topics, and I think it's going to be beneficial for people listening to our conversation. So again, I want to thank you for coming on and having it with me, staying up late. I know that you're a midnight warrior over there in Serbia. But thank you, man. Thank you for everybody in the live chat. Thank you for everybody who supported with some streams. I'm going to be back tomorrow with Dr. Michael Moeller, and we're going to be having a very special episode on No Nut November. So we're going to be he's going to be presenting all the scientific research on cooming and how it lowers your T levels. And we're going to be promoting for all of us Orthodox men, take a vow together, absolutely no squirting for the month of November. So we'll be diving into that topic tomorrow. Posh, thank you again, brother. Happy All Saints Day, or I guess Eve. We're really not there yet.
It's Saint Luke for week. Us. We're on the old calendar. It's Saint Luke.
Yeah. So
thank you for having me, and God bless you, and God bless all of you who are watching.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I will be back tomorrow as always.